Nice job. High four.
One shot, one kill. Ronnie did.
Now introducing your Butthole Podcast, Scott, the Great Brandino, Gage's Rage, and Star Lamar.
What's up, girl?
I love the butthole.
Well, duh, you love the butthole. Who doesn't love the butthole, right?
Exactly.
That's right. Everybody loves the butthole. Welcome into episode 274, fellow Budholians. Buds. We'll stop at Buds.
We'll just go Buds.
Buds.
Yeah.
Bud sounds like a good one. In this episode, Gage's Rage. Do you have a fantasy 101 to kick things off?
I most certainly do. So we're going to start off talking about your fantasy team as a whole and having extra spots. So what I like to call an extra spot would be a backup running back or a wide receiver that's a really deep depth guy that necessarily wouldn't be in your lineup every given week. Maybe only a matchup dependent guy. And what you want to do with this extra spot is totally up to you. If you want to hold on to the same wide receiver that you drafted in the fantasy football draft, hold on to him all year and wait for an injury or something to happen for him to become viable, that's a great choice. What I like to think of is running backs. Running backs are so desperate in almost any fantasy football league I'm in. So what I want to do with that extra spot is I want to drop the guy and I want to pick up someone that's a backup running back that if there was an injury, he would become a very, very fantasy viable target. So if you were to do this in week 1 with Elijah Mitchell, you'd be ahead of the game and no one would even be able to claim him. You'd already have him on your team. So looking at your league as a whole, looking at guys, other managers who have stud running backs, maybe they don't have their handcuffs. Scoop a handcuff. If Cook is to go down, I mean, knock on wood, he doesn't have it, but Alexander Madison would be in for an amazing workload. And it's a very valuable spot when you're looking at a guy who's not going to play on your team anyway. Use that extra spot to the best of your ability. Pick up a good guy that could be a stud if given the opportunity.
I think this also opens the door to don't be afraid to admit that you're wrong. You drafted a player in a later round. I took a shot on Tyrell Williams, considered to be the wide receiver 1 in Detroit. Now, he went down with an injury, didn't have much of a week 1. I don't think he played. Well, tonight is week 2 here. But Don't be afraid to drop those guys and pick somebody up in replacement of them, because if you're drafting them in the 13th, 14th, 15th round, odds are you're going to be able to find somebody that can be just as productive, if not more, depending on their situation, an injury that may have happened. But don't be afraid to admit that a draft pick later in the round or even an earlier draft pick that you might be looking to trade away. Don't be afraid to make those moves and use your extra spots on your team to fill that in with guys that have higher potential than what you may have drafted.
Absolutely. And that can be the difference. Like I said, you could save $50 to $100 of your fab. You could save tons of money, and you could be in a much better spot than you would be having a backup wide receiver that's never really going to play on your team.
And the best way to do that, too, is if guys go to if they get deemed out before the games kick off, slide them into that IR spot if your team has them, and grab a backup that would be a clear-cut starter if a starter got hurt. Alexander Madison, for instance. I don't even know. I'm trying to think who else. Kenneth Gainwell.
Rondale
J.D.
Moore.
McKissick.
Lots of
Rondale Moore would be a good grab. And you never know. I grabbed Elijah Mitchell week 1 right before the noon kickoffs. Mostert got hurt, and I flipped him in a dynasty league for a few pieces. You just never know.
Exactly. So that's my advice for this week. Using the most out of those extra spots, those 13th, 14th, 15th round picks. And like Brandon said, maybe admitting you're wrong, cutting them is tough to do, but that's how you stay as a good team. That's how you stay competitive.
Yeah, just because you're high on a guy at the beginning of the season and you like them doesn't mean that they're always going to pan out the way you expected to at the beginning of the year. So don't be afraid to cut ties. Also, look ahead with your extra roster spots. If you're going to pick a guy up, look ahead at bye weeks. Look ahead at championship weeks. What's going to be happening around those times? Who are they going to be facing around those times? Because picking up, let's say, Elijah Mitchell may seem great, but if you have multiple bye weeks the same week that he's on a bye, you're going to be pinched to have to drop somebody anyway. And then also if his playoff schedule is against Washington or Tampa Bay, or maybe he plays the Rams twice or gets Seattle in that, like, I know Seattle looked terrible last night, but it's still might not be the right move for your team.
Well said. Well said. So that'll be the Fantasy 101 from week 2.
Solid, bud.
Getting into a little bit of injuries of the week.
Oh,
Can you guys hear my dogs in the background?
Are
Can you
they
hear that?
squeakers or are they real injuries? We're finding out now. It's a good sounder you got in the background there, Scott.
Son of a bitch. All right, they're just fighting over a fucking toy. Here we go. Deontay Johnson injured on the last what's that, Gage?
There was a bunch of injuries, wasn't there?
Yeah. Deontay Johnson injured on the last play of the game. No confirmation yet on how bad it is. It didn't look very good. Tua Tagovailoa hurt his ribs. X-rays came back negative. It's going to be a pain tolerance type of thing for him.
It might
Tyrod
be fair
Taylor.
to name which quarterbacks didn't get hurt yesterday.
Way shorter.
Yeah, should we just go with that list instead?
Yeah, I think there's three.
Tyrod Taylor, hamstring injury. I had in here that I doubt he would play this week because Houston plays Thursday night. Sounds like it's going to be longer than just a 1-week injury for him. So if you're in deep quarterback leagues, go grab Davis Mills. He might be worth an ad. I don't think he particularly looked great yesterday, but
No, he was thrown into the action at the end there. But if you're, again, it's kind of looking at a prospect. Tyrod has kind of been history of being a starter and losing the job. Mills could come out and ball.
Daryl Henderson Jr. had a rib injury early in the fourth quarter yesterday in the Los Angeles Rams Indianapolis Colts game. He did not return. Sonny Michel actually looked pretty good when he went in and spelled him. So Daryl Henderson is going to be a situation to monitor. I haven't heard anything as we talk about this Monday night. Most times injuries stuff doesn't start coming out till Tuesday, Wednesday. So you should know by the time that you can place bids on the waiver wire. Carson Wentz has 2 ankle injuries. Both ankles are injured. And if he had 3 ankles, he'd have 3 ankle injuries. The guy is a glass case of emotion. Andy Dalton, knee injury. As Brandon said, fucking A. All the quarterbacks. How many quarterbacks are hurt? All of the quarterbacks are hurt.
Everyone. He
Elijah Mitch. Sorry.
He did not return to the game. Does sound like Nagy is being stubborn and said, hey, he's healthy, he's our guy. So I would still expect Justin Fields to come in week 2 and play quite a bit, even if Dalton is healthy, but he may get the starting opportunity.
And I will say too, Fields did not look great when he took over for Dalton, but I think if Fields is the starter, we've been on this as a group. If Fields is the starter, I think all of those Bears players get brought to another level.
It seems that
so don't drop your Bears players.
Rookie mobile quarterbacks find a way to make things happen because people don't know their mobility, how they can shift, so they can kind of move around a little bit more, and they tend to get those bigger, crazier plays to go their way.
Correct.
As we know with Kyler, D-backs get their eyes in the backfield and want to make a play.
Don't bring that
It's
up.
just natural instinct. And you got to train yourself to not do that when you're playing against a Russian quarterback. Regarding the San Francisco 49ers and Philadelphia Eagles game, Elijah Mitchell suffered a shoulder injury. It's not expected to be too bad of an injury, but it was something that took him out of the game for a while. Jermichael Hasty had an ankle injury, which looks to be a 1 to 3 week injury. And Trey Sermon suffered a concussion. So the 49ers actually were bringing in a few running backs today. They brought in
I had that pulled up earlier.
Lamar Miller. They brought in Lamar Miller.
And
they brought in Duke Johnson, and they were also going to bring in TJ Yeldon.
Wow.
I think Duke Johnson would be worth at least maybe picking up if you got a room for him. I think he's still a pretty decent running back. I'm surprised he's not on a roster right now. But Lamar Miller and TJ Yeldon, neither of them do much for me.
No, they're just going to be a guy that can go in and spell the starter. When they're tired, they need a break. One thing about Mitchell's injury is he did go back in the game because they didn't have any running backs after Sermon went down. So Mitchell did go back in. I don't think the shoulder injury is serious. I haven't heard too much on it. But, again, Duke Johnson, pass-catching guy on a team that likes to utilize their running backs, not a bad pickup.
Laviska Shenault, shoulder injury. He's been an absolute downer of a player for fantasy this year so far. Dalvin Cook came kind of in and out in the Vikings-Cardinals game. He's going to play, I'm sure, next week, but he's definitely the type of guy that you want to keep an eye on because he does have a tendency at times to disappear and miss a couple weeks. That's really it as far as big injuries of the week, but it was absolutely littered full of quarterbacks. So if you are in a position where you have one of the quarterbacks on your roster that are injured, go grab a backup. But you should be able to figure something out. Most 12-team leagues shouldn't have to worry too much about any of these quarterbacks, but if you're in a deeper league, you might want to try and pivot and find something else.
One more note, not necessarily an injury, but Will Fuller was supposed to come back from his suspension and had a personal excuse and was not cited, and it does not sound good from everything I've read and heard.
He was back today.
He was back at the facility and stuff?
At the facility today, yep.
Okay. Yeah, I know they just said there was no return in question, but that's good to hear. All right. I was banking on him week 2. That really screwed me over.
Well, now you can get him.
Brian Flores basically said regarding Fuller that they didn't know when they'd get him back, and they weren't going to push him to come back. So whatever the family issue was, it didn't sound great.
No.
I think the thing is, he said life happens. Like, he's got something going on outside. Don't know how that's going to skewer his mental acuity once he comes back to the game. Plus, we don't know the quarterback situation. So I don't know how I feel about Will Fuller. Doesn't really feel like a safe start to me once he comes back either way.
Well, the Miami situation with quarterback hasn't put much up anyways regarding fantasy output this season. Devontae Parker's been okay, but Gaskin hasn't been good. The quarterbacks haven't been good. Gesicki, I think, only has a couple catches. He didn't have any points week 1. Miami, Jalen Waddle's actually been the best fantasy player outside of Parker, so I'd be a little leery.
Major case with drops this week, too.
Didn't they drop a goose egg yesterday, 35-0 to the Bills?
It was brutal.
I saw the South Park meme come through the video. It was, fuck you, Dolphin! As they ran out. You'd have to see the video. It was pretty funny.
Fuck are you, a Dolphin? Fuck are you, whale?
Okay. Oh, man.
Moving into Gage. This is your Infinity Stone segment. I'm going to let you take this thing over. You put a lot of work into this.
All right. So last week we debuted the Infinity Stones of the week. We got a little bit more to it this week. So what we did was we're going to talk about the top player of the fantasy week in every given position. We got a little bit more detailed here. We're going to do kickers, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker or a defense that really blew up, and then the flex play of the week. So running off with it first was Kyler Murray against our Minnesota Vikings. He absolutely had a game. He had 400 through the air, 3 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Also
2 interceptions.
Oh, it was 2?
It was 2, yep.
Well, that stat really sucks there, but he also got 31 yards and the rushing touchdown. Ended up with 33 points through the air to lead the passers. On the ground, the Yeti monster, Derrick Henry, absolutely blew up. Looked like he did in mid-December with the 3 touchdowns, 182 yards on the ground. They even threw him the ball, man.
Career high in catches. Career high with 6 catches. Also,
55 yards. Wow.
He had 160 yards after contact of his 182.
The dude's an absolute monster. I can't.
And they needed him because that offense has been stagnant without his run game there. They were awful through the air. I've had Tannehill in my fantasy league, in our yearly league that we're in together, and it has not been fun. I'll tell you that much.
Henry was absolutely pivotal, and that was an overtime game, so he was absolutely clobbering the stats there. Moving on to receiver, we have Cooper Kupp from the LA Rams. Again, the breakfast with Matt Stafford is working. This guy had tons of targets, ended up with the 9 catches for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sorry. He had -5 rushing yards, but that didn't matter. He still almost put up 37. At tight end, we all saw it on Sunday Night Football. Travis Kelsey went off for that massive score for 45, 50 yards?
It was impressive. So
when he caught the ball, he had a he had a 3.3% chance of making that a touchdown.
Oh, and that's why he is one of the best. And I bet this is not going to be his last time on the Infinity Stones for the year. Ended with almost 24 points with the 7 for 109 and a score. For our kicker defense, I got to edge it for the kicker. Honorable mention to Tampa Bay's defense. They got 2 late scores that put them at 19 points. But depending on your league, Graham Gano for the New York Giants on Thursday night with the 50-plus yarders, 2 of them, probably edged you up to maybe 19, 20 points. 5 for 5 is also a bonus in some fantasy leagues. So he was absolutely money on the spot for kickers and a really high-scoring performance. That's a game changer at the kicker position.
For them, it didn't matter as much, but kickers to hit their field goals and their extra points, it does end up mattering at the end of the game in real football. Fantasy as well, because you're getting those points, but when you go 5 for 5, you're getting quite a bit there.
My heart. All right, and then to round it off, we have Defense Player of the Week. Ended up being Tyler Lockett. Absolutely had a fucking dime of a game again. You're not sure what you get every week to week with Lockett. He had the boom game last week, and he did it again with 8 catches for 178 and the score. Another really long, broken touchdown play, but he's still getting targets. He's still getting catches. Studley performance from Tyler Lockett.
If you're a DK Metcalf owner, are you a little concerned with how much love Lockett's getting from Wilson? Or do you just feel like it's going to be like last year where the pendulum will swing and Metcalf will get his too?
Yeah, I think at some point Metcalf is going to have games like that. I'm grateful it wasn't this past week because I would have lost. But Lockett has always been that kind of guy where kind of starts out strong, has a really good first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, normally a wide receiver 1, if not wide receiver 1 on the week, multiple weeks, and then he fades at the rest of the year. So he does get concerning in that week 7 to 12, even in your championship. You're not confident starting him. Metcalf he's gonna get his. He's gonna get thrown the ball a little bit more often. Right now, it just isn't going his way, and they're finding the open guy to try and win the game.
Yeah, and the reason they lost that overtime game, they did look like they were going to DK in very pivotal moments. It looked like 3rd down, he was the target guy, but Tennessee's defense was just all over him. You know, they knew who to cover, when to cover him, and like I said, Lockett really broke the large touchdown play again. But I think DK is part of an explosive offense, and he's going to get his. It's just a matter of time.
What concerns me more about that offense is fading at the end of the year. Beginning of the year, they're always hot. And then Russell Wilson, he's in MVP talks. And then all of a sudden, come week 8, something just changes. And all of a sudden, that's not the case anymore. So that's what makes me nervous about this team.
Part of, I think, what happens with them is Pete Carroll decides it's time to go to old school football and start running the ball more. But right now, the Seattle offense is rolling. They haven't been there. They have not been the issue the first 2 weeks of the season. So it'll be interesting to see what they do against Minnesota in week 3.
No, it won't.
It'll be a big game. A lot of comeback for both sides of the team, or both sides, Seattle and Minnesota, coming off really tough losses. It'll be fun to watch.
And that's the Infinity Stones of the week.
Yes, sir.
Stuff. Week 1 with graphics. I like it.
Morgan,
sorry, I just am
what do you
pulling
think?
up the list.
The studs and duds of the week after the Infinity Stones? We had the number
Absolutely.
1.
Roll with it, brother.
Quarterbacks really showed out. I know Sunday night you had Patrick Mahomes, but he was not the star of Sunday night. It's actually Lamar Jackson. He was able to break 100 yards on the ground, scored 2 touchdowns, and then he also threw for 1. So he ended up with about 32 points. That was an absolute dime of a game, and we saw at the end of it all, he had the rush for the first down on 4th and 2. They put the ball in his hands, and he took it.
God, I love that. It just, you hear on the sideline Harbaugh yelling over, "You want to go for it? All right, let's go for it." Like that, and I mentioned it in our group text. That's the difference between a winner's mentality and a loser's mentality. Is a coach that's like, all right, like we don't want to give the ball back to this guy. We're either going to get this 4th down and go down and win this game, or we're going to kick it back and hope our defense can stop one of the best quarterbacks in the game. And I like the fact that they went for it.
Yeah, you don't kick that. You go for that. Because if you go for it, you're guaranteed to win. If you kick it, you're probably the odds-on favorite based on statistics to win, but you're giving it to Patrick Mahomes. And all he needs to do is get within field goal range.
And Tyreek Hill can get that on one play.
Yep. I love it. I love the mentality. And I love how they kept the ball in Lamar's hands as well on it.
That's what you got to do. Winning teams are going to give the quarterback the ball. Something the Chiefs should have, had in their playbook as well. You pay a guy $500 million. Don't hand it off to your running back. Like, give him the opportunity to win that game.
Oof.
Speaking of, is there concern with Clyde Edwards-Helaire that he's a complete bust? This guy was a guy that was drafted in the first round as a rookie last season. People had high expectations for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he has not lived up to any of them. This year looks worse than last year.
I don't know if I'm ready to go bust on him yet. It's definitely concerning. That late-time fumble, I don't see that going over well. I don't see him still getting the bulk of those, carry. I mean, he'll still get the bulk, but I think it's going to tone back, I should say is a better way to put it. They like Daryl Williams. They like him to back up. Jerick McKinnon is still solid. He's not great, but he can still get the job done. So I think they have serviceable guys to spread that ball around. And until Clyde steps up and shows that he's the guy, why force it?
One thing, I don't think Andy Reid or Patrick Mahomes are the type where Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a fumble in that game, and I don't think either of Reid or Mahomes are the type that are going to just be like, all right, you're going to the bench. They'll give him his shot at redemption.
He's got to earn it, though. I think if he doesn't start showing it, it's not going to, then I'm concerned. But for now,
I mean, you look at
draft him.
You look at the running backs that were drafted behind him in that draft. They drafted this guy in the first round, and they would have been better off. Well, Dobbins and Akers are hurt now, but they would have been better off drafting any one of the 3 or 4 that went after him. It's I don't know. I just don't think a team like the Chiefs really care to sit around and wait on a young running back like that to try and figure it out. This team has Super Bowl aspirations, and they should.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Moving on, Tom Brady also had a dime of a game. He ended up with the 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He did have a fumble late, but the defense covered his back and got 2 turnover touchdowns to end it. So he ended up with about 29, 30 points in the air. And just an absolute dime of a game. What you expect from the champions that bring back every starter. It was awesome to see in Tampa Bay. Those guys were fucking fired up.
Yeah, and Gronk.
Tom Brady can play until he's 50.
As long as he wants to, he's in.
I think the next stud here for quarterback is kind of a surprise. Daniel Jones, a lot of people bashing him. Going up against the Washington football team, everyone's like, oh, Daniel Jones is going to be trash this week. 29 fantasy points is what he put up.
Throwing, though, he kind of was trash.
Yeah, I mean, he did get 16 points from on the ground, and he would have had another 10 if that holding penalty didn't happen, another 45-yard touchdown or something. I mean, the guy was pretty good. He did have a lot of drops on his wide receiver side. Galladay dropped a couple. Sterling Shepard, though, in that game. I mean, that guy's got to be a waiver ad of the week for anybody who doesn't have him because he has been electric for that team in the first 2 weeks.
He could easily slot in as your wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team in a 12-team league, and you could feel okay about it. One thing regarding Daniel Jones, remember, fantasy football, they don't have to be an actual good quarterback to be a viable fantasy football option. And Daniel Jones is exactly the type of player that we're talking about.
Yes. Moving on, we'll stay on the stud train, and we'll talk about duds later because who wants to ruin the good vibes? Running backs, we had a couple names that we expected to see in week 1, but we didn't really see. And Najee Harris got into the end zone and got involved in the passing game. Actually was able to hold on to a few of them. He ended with about 19, 18 points. Had the 5 catches for 40 yards and scored the touchdown. So that was good to see for anyone that drafted him really early and expected a lot. Got you double digits instead of the week 1 dud he was. Also, what I'm noticing is all these guys caught the ball really freaking well. You know, if you want to be a fantasy viable running back,
in PPR,
it's like you have to be a dual threat kind of guy.
Well, when you're getting 1 point for every catch, yeah, it adds up a lot. Derrick Henry getting 6 points on top of his 182 rushing yards and his 3 touchdowns. Like, that definitely helps out. Eckler caught the ball, 9 times in this game, 9 for 61.
Yep.
McKissick
That's
caught
15 points right there.
McKissick caught 5 for 83. I mean, that's 13 points. That for a guy that barely rushes the ball, except when he vultured the touchdown from Antonio Gibson. I mean, he was the obvious running back target on that team as well from Heineke. So McKissick, I think, holds that value this season. White, I can see kind of shifting a little bit back and forth between Harris and White. Same thing with Singletary and Zach Moss. You can kind of see that happen.
I disagree. Moss got the late scores when they were up by the 4 touchdowns, 28 rip. But Singletary was a fantasy valuable guy last week and proved he's going to be the starter for this team. And I think the 82 rushing yards shows he is going to be the number 1 option. Zach Moss is the clear backup. In my eyes.
Done on the ground. I'm not going to deny. I mean, he had a 45-yard touchdown off the bat.
Wasn't Moss a healthy scratch last week?
He was week 1.
He was.
I know exactly what that was. Have you guys heard any information on that?
I have heard nothing about that.
And he's the starter.
Yeah, he's upset. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe he's butthurt about it. Who knows?
No, I think if you're going to roll with a Bills running back, it should be Josh Allen. But
well, he hasn't been doing a whole heck of a lot for you either so far this year.
You don't have to when you're winning games by the amount they were.
Well, I know, but for a fantasy quarterback, you want it. He has not had the production so far in the first couple of weeks. It's been a slight disappointment, I should say.
And like you're saying, fantasy football and real football are very different. So
you're not going to pass the ball when you're up 35-0.
Exactly.
Like, you don't need to. So
you're doing enough to win, and that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the wide receivers, there was a whole bunch of action. There was so many guys that scored over 20 points. It was absolutely nuts. Paired with Tom Brady, Mike Evans is the one that stands out. He had a really stinker last week, and had 5 catches for 75 and got the end zone twice. So that was awesome to see from Mike Evans after a really bad game in week 1.
I also think that
go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, with that Tampa Bay offense, it's going to be really hard each week to tell who's going to get the touchdowns. I honestly think Gronk might be your safest bet to play every single week in that offense, because from the tight end position, if you catch 1 touchdown, you have a pretty good week. So I'd be a little bit – you're going to start Godwin, you're going to start Evans. I still think you should start Brown in the flex, but you could see this the whole way through as far as high weeks and low weeks for some of these receivers.
And for some of them, like Godwin and Evans, where you drafted them, you almost have to start them every week and ride it out. That's kind of the scary thing about taking guys in a team like this is, like Godwin put up 30 points last week. This week was 15, which is still a serviceable number. It was still a good week. But if you didn't catch that touchdown at the end of the game, like where you drafted him and what you're getting out of him, that wouldn't have been super great. But, I mean, if you take him in the 2nd round or the 3rd round, probably the 3rd round is probably where you were getting him at. You almost feel like you have to start him because he's one of your starting 2 wide receivers at that point. Maybe your number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, there's no reason to bench him.
A little extra fantasy 101 is remembering weeks like this. If you do lose a week because you had an off week from Mike Evans, remember that going into next year. Remember that there are guys that ebb and flow. They may end at wide receiver 12, technically a wide receiver 1, but they come in these waves that are tough to manage when you're in a weekly fantasy football league that every week matters just as much as the next. So
I think a better example for that would be like a Tyler Lockett. Like Mike Evans has consistently put up 1,000 yards every year of his career. And the touchdowns have been somewhere between that 8 and 12 range, most of them. So he's pretty consistent.
Mike Evans seems to be consistent, but he always gets these. He's a multiple touchdown guy. You know, he's gotten 2 and 3 touchdowns in multiple games every single year, and then he'll have the off week where he does have 2 catches for 40 yards and no score. You know,
last season,
those games.
Mike Evans last season he had 6 games under 10 fantasy points in a PPR league. You can't.
Season.
Yeah, you can't have that.
That's a lot, dude.
It's almost a
And
third.
in those games, he had 4 targets, 2 targets, 2 targets, 5 targets, and 4 targets.
And
That's
did
not even enough targets.
Was that spread
Yeah.
out amongst the year? Or was that consolidated to a specific, like,
Chunk of the season.
yeah, like weeks 4 to
So
10?
that was week 1, and then it goes week 6 and week 7, back-to-back weeks. He did have 10.4 in week 9, but that's not great either in a PPR league. Week 14, he had 8.6. In week 17, he had 7.6. Your first round of playoffs, your wide receiver 1 puts up 7.6 points. That gets you beat.
Kicked out. That's where personally I'm looking for those high floor guys that you'll get the 10 targets out of your guy in a PPR league. That's a guaranteed 7 catches, hopefully. And then yards are just candy on top, you know. If you're drafting Evans as your wide receiver 1, you're disappointed half the year, and that sucks.
Especially now that Gronk is stepping up and Antonio Brown looked awesome in week 1, and you have a healthy Chris Godwin. Like, that means you're going to see a lot more week 1s out of Mike Evans this year than you're going to see week 2s.
Let's just remember, it's not necessarily because Mike Evans is a bad player or sporadic. There's just so many mouths to feed.
Exactly, especially with Gronk coming into his own now. But on the other side of this chain, you have Cortland Sutton in Denver, had 9 catches for 159 yards. This is exactly who I'm talking about, that very, very high floor kind of guy. No paint involved here. I know Tyler sounds very jealous of his mustache that looks this good.
He ran out of brown, so he went to red.
But Cortland Sutton is a guy in Denver that had a really, really good week, and Jerry Jeudy just goes down. So it looks like he could really be a high floor type of guy, a steal in the draft when you got him in the 5th or 6th round, and he could really push teams to a very, very good fantasy season and possibly a championship. I think he's a very great buy potential, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, what you're going to see with Sutton in Denver.
Yeah, I guess you were getting Sutton ADP was wide receiver 34, went pick 78. So, yeah, you're right around that middle 6th round.
Yeah.
You would have got him. It's a good pull, Gage. Nice job.
What a fucking stud. Again, on Thursday night, it was a long time ago, but Terry McLaurin absolutely went off. He had the 11 catches for 107 and a score.
It was a compliment.
Thanks, Tyler. It is, yeah, so thick it's painted. Terry ends up with the 27.7 fantasy points. Another surprising guy, Mike Williams, had a really good week last week and kind of a flashy guy so far in his short 4 or 5 years in the NFL. But he had 7 for 91 and a score in San Diego's bummer of a game for 22 points. That was a really good week again for Mike Williams.
He was wide receiver 1 in L.A., wasn't he? For the Chargers, that was.
Yes, correct. He did outscore Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, again, had about 15 to 19 points, but wasn't able to reach the end zone. He did have a score that got called back on a illegal formation bullshit at the end of the game, and they missed the field goal to tie. So it was a pretty bummer week for LA, but I think they'll bounce back next week and have a good game.
Mike Williams, if he stays healthy, will be a top 24 wide receiver.
Oh, easily. He's got the talent for it. He just can't stay on the field.
He's got the size. Yeah, he's got the size. He's got the length. Herbert loves him. Herbert loved him last year towards the end of the season. Yes. Anybody, if you have a receiver that's 215, 20 pounds and 6'5", that's a player that you want to get the ball to. The biggest thing for Williams is to stay healthy.
Yeah, the biggest thing for Williams is fucking landing on his feet. The dude's a monster, jumps up in the air 40 inches, and then decides to land on his back and his hip.
That's true. He's got to learn how to fall. We'll have to send him to Gage's Rage's School of How to Fall. Fantasy 101, how to fall next week, Gage?
Dry walls versus dry balls. Start there, damn it.
That's how to run through a defensive line effectively.
And there's your wide receivers. I think we mentioned Gronkowski had an absolute stellar game with 2 scores in the first fucking quarter. That guy is just a beast, and he should be added. For tight ends, I can't even really think of anyone else who had really had an outstanding game besides Kelsey.
Max Williams for the Cardinals caught a couple big passes, a tip ball in the Vikings, and then ended up in his hands for like 40 yards. He ended up with 7 for 94. He was the third scoring tight end this week. Jack Doyle, Noah Fant got in the end zone. Kyle Pitts, though, starting to become a little bit more of what people were hoping. 5 for 73. It was only 12 points, but at least you're seeing some action out of him. And then the last one, Darren Waller, 11.5. He went from having 19 targets in week 1 down to 5 targets in week 2 for 65 yards. Did not hit my prop bet of over 70.5 yards with him. So I did not win my Thrive Fantasy plug of the week, which was super unfortunate. But you know what? That's how it goes sometimes.
Absolutely. That'll wrap up the studs. I think Scott maybe had a few duds for us.
I have all the
You
duds.
just name out
Here
your
we go.
fantasy team.
He's not a dud. Oh, fuck out of here. I'm the highest scorer in Dynasty, baby.
I was talking about Scott. Come on now.
Oh.
Hold on. I'm going to pull up this comment. Easy Turbo. It was
for
a compliment.
duds.
All right, Gage.
How about
You put that one up already.
No, I know this was. I could pull it up again and reiterate because I wasn't coming after you on that one.
How about the entire fucking Saints offense? Jameis Winston's a dud of the week. He had 111 passing yards, 2 interceptions. He did get 1 passing touchdown. Alvin Kamara. I'm going to start calling him the magician because he has ways of disappearing. 5 rushing yards for 25 receiving yards and 5 points. Last year, Kamara was great. The year before that, he had some of these same types of games. I'm not selling Alvin Kamara yet, but it's definitely worrisome when you have a guy like Jameis Winston at quarterback who's always been a wishy-washy player.
And the biggest thing with Kamara would be the fact that it's his first year with not Drew Brees. So we don't really know. I don't recall how well Winston used his running backs, and he did look like vintage Winston. But I don't recall too many Tampa Bay running backs that were high-end, stellar guys when Winston was leading that team.
Winston doesn't want the 3-yard dump down for a yak opportunity for a running back. He's going to chuck that ball 50 yards down the field. It's going to have to be a philosophical change for Winston if Kamara is going to – because Kamara always had a high floor with Brees because Brees would dump the ball down to him at least 5 times a game. If that disappears, Kamara's going to see more weeks like this. He's still a good running back overall, but his floor is now very low. Jonathan Taylor had only 51 rushing yards, 5.8 points. The Colts offensive line got destroyed by the Rams, which the Rams are a top 3 defense in the league, so I wouldn't be too worried about Jonathan Taylor. But Taylor didn't have a great week last week either, so I'd be a little bit concerned about him. It's not the start you want to see, but it's also not the fantasy matchups you want to see to start the season either. I would not be selling Jonathan Taylor. Laviska Shenault, at this point, drop him. It's not worth having a guy like him on your roster. There's so many good free agent wide receivers. There's a lot of guys that have shown out so far to start the season that you could go get. Drop Laviska Shenault. Go find somebody else. Antonio Brown, we kind of touched on Tampa Bay. They're going to have weeks like this where players just don't produce. Where you drafted Antonio Brown, you're going to be happy with his value by the end of the year. Don't panic on this. One surprise, George Kittle, who's had a slow start to the season. He had 3.7 fantasy points. You don't want to see your stud players like this have weeks this bad because George Kittle is going to be in your starting lineup every week. When he puts up 3.7 points, it's not good.
You drafted him in the 2nd or 3rd round. A lot of people took him in the 3rd round. He was number 2 or number 3 tight end off the board. I mean, putting up those types of points is what's going to lose you matchups because your high-end guys aren't producing.
I will add that Kittle's 3.7 points is not as brutal as Taylor's 6 points because that position difference, a lot of people are playing shit tight ends. They're only going to score about 7 or 8 points. You know, if you get the guy that scores, you're into a really good position at tight end. But with Taylor putting up the 5-6 points, that's brutal. That sets you back at least 10 points compared to someone else's number 1 running back.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
It was like tight end 24, 25 this week, though. So that is still brutal. A lot of guys ahead. This is the thing.
People that draft Kelsey early, Waller early, Kittle early, you're banking on that position differential in points being enough to overcome where, I mean,
A lack
maybe
of
now
running
Brandon
back.
Cooks is your So maybe now Brandon Cooks is your wide receiver too going into the season. Turns out Brandon Cooks was a pretty good pick, but that gets mitigated when George Kittle only scores 3.7 points. You need those tight ends to be studs. If they're not, you're in a bad spot. And George Kittle so far to start the season doesn't look like he's going to finish as a top 3 tight end for fantasy.
I think
Still
we're just
early. We're
a few
week 2.
minutes out from watching, hopefully, tight end 2 or 1 in TJ Hawkinson. That guy's a fucking stud.
We'll see.
I still
He's got-
like Kittle overall for the season, but TJ Hawkinson last week, I'm excited to see what he does tonight against Green Bay, because it looks to me like this Detroit Lions offense is all Hawkinson and running backs. I don't even think they need to use wide receivers. Put 7
100%.
linemen out there, your quarterback, your 2 running backs, and your tight end. Wide receiver no longer exists. It's the new age NFL.
I'll tell you what, I have a newfound love for Jamal Williams after that press conference interview he had the other day.
He's such a cool dude.
One man's trash, another man's treasure. Oh no. That's awesome.
You know he's excited to try and ball out tonight too.
And hey man, Detroit Lions should get a win.
Bite those kneecaps. But you can, as far as I'm concerned, you could bite Aaron Rodgers' kneecaps right off. I have no fantasy shares of his. I won't even be a little upset.
I wouldn't be either. None of it. Aaron Jones would be my 1A option. Rodgers is 1B.
Bite them both, Dan Campbell. You didn't bite any last week. Bite them both.
He got most of last week.
Yeah, that's true. I saw a tweet out there. It was a little ironic that Dan Campbell goes out and gives the kneecap talk, and then Raheem Mostert is done for the year with a bum kneecap. So, it is a little fitting. So we'll see what happens tonight.
Just wait until Rodgers goes to drop back and his kneecap just disappears.
It's gone.
Do you guys want to make any Monday Night Football predictions for any studs or duds?
Yeah, Hawkinson's a stud. I think the Green Bay offense is going to get right, and I think bet the over.
Ooh, I like it.
Hawkinson's going to be a stud for sure. I think, Quintez Cephas? I think he's going to step in. I do think they're going to use wide receivers. They have to. Tyrell Williams has got that concussion. So I do think Cephas is a guy to keep an eye on. As far as Green Bay goes, you got to look at their top dogs, Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, and Robert Tonyan. Cobb could see a little bit of action here, a little bit more week 2, getting back into it. But for now, I would stick with those 3.
Good choices. I like them all. And that's going to be our studs and duds for week 2.
All right, what's next on the agenda?
Should we talk about some waiver ads? It's a little
I think so.
but
Well, not necessarily. The only thing you'd be looking at would be Monday night between the Lions and Green Bay here, and Cephas again is going to be the number 1 waiver wire ad between these 2 teams.
Yeah, if you got an extra spot, if you can move a guy to IR, picking up AJ Dillon if he's on your bench would totally fit in with my fantasy 101. If Jones goes down, I think Dillon would be a studly free agent ad. But moving on to the rest of the NFL, there was a couple guys that absolutely blew up, have had some really good weeks, showing a lot of consistency. A bunch of wide receivers, but I think first and foremost, we got to talk about Dallas and the running back situation there. Because Ezekiel Elliott has not looked good. Okay, he finally did bounce back this week, but he still was not the best running back on his team. Okay,
No.
Tony Pollard needs to be owned in 100% of fantasy football leagues. If he's on the waiver wire, add him. It doesn't matter who you have to drop, add that man. Because Ezekiel Elliott he's a distraction at best right now. Tony Pollard is the better running back. I think I've been saying that for about 2 years, waiting for the shoe to drop.
Finally right on this one.
No, Pollard has shown when he comes in the game, he does just as well, if not better than Ezekiel Elliott. And last week, you got to see a real taste of it. That dude has got explosiveness. He's 3-4 years younger. Pollard is a guy that needs to be owned.
The only thing that stops Dallas from running Pollard more than Zeke is Zeke's contract.
There's no way to justify
Pollard is
back up running more when you're paying Zeke 15 to 20 million for the next 3 years.
Part of it is at the same time is you don't want to say it as much, but distraction as well. Zeke is a high caliber, was a high caliber player. We'll see if he can get back to that, but he's still a big name. So if he's not getting his carries, that tends to linger into the media. That'll linger into the locker room. That'll cause a little bit of a rift. So unless it's like night and day and this guy is just completely washed and done, and it's not just a couple rusty weeks, then I do think if he's still got a little bit left, and you're shifting over to Pollard, I do think that causes a big distraction in the locker room that I don't think Dallas can handle.
Bold prediction. Dallas should cut or trade Zeke in the offseason so they can re-sign Michael Gallup.
I think Cooper is way more likely to be cut, but I like it. That offense needs to roll through Dak and rookie running backs or rookie contract running backs for sure.
Yeah, and Cooper did not look like the best wide receiver in the league like he claims he is last week. He only got like 3.8 points or something like that. It was not great.
Did I mention him as a dud? Because I should have. He was terrible.
That was an half point, I should say. So full point, he might have gotten closer to 5, but still not a good week.
Yeah, and Cooper is, I think, the case in point for those ebb and flow guys we're talking about that have massive multi-score weeks and then totally off the radar the next.
And I do think part of that is the offense that they play in. They do have options with Gallup and with CeeDee Lamb and Zeke and Pollard, and even their tight ends are serviceable. So when you have that many people on an offense, it's not surprising that you're going to see a guy have a down week like that just because there's too many people to feed. And if he's not open, don't force it to him. When you're Washington, you force it to McLaurin because he's the best guy on your team. You know that.
Well, and because he's the best receiver in the NFL.
Okay. All right. Scott.
All right. Moving on. Another.
He auto-corrected and said that McLaurin was the best receiver in the NFL. I think he meant Adam Thielen. But that's okay.
I'm sorry. Did I just black out a little bit there? By the way, stream edition, Cedric Wilson for Dallas with Gallup being hurt. Add Cedric Wilson. He didn't do much this week, so if somebody picked him up last week, they might drop him for somebody else. One of the best things about the waiver wire is people have very, very, very short leashes. A fantasy owner might drop a good player because they see the new fancy shiny toy of the week. Let them drop that player, and then you can swipe that player up for free afterwards.
Other guys to look at, again, Alexander Madison with Cook kind of being banged up. If he's not already rostered in your league, he's a guy to keep an eye on. We mentioned a little bit earlier about Duke Johnson. He's a solid waiver wire add. Tim Patrick of Denver. Sorry, brain fart over here. Not bad. Yeah, he had a touchdown last week as well. Teddy likes him. He's a solid guy, especially with Judy out. We do have a question here. James is asking, pick up the Ravens, Carolina, or Tampa Bay for week 3.
Who does Tampa Bay have in week 3?
This is what I would tell you regarding Tampa Bay, James. To start the season, Tampa Bay had the easiest schedule of any team in the NFL for the 2021-22 season. And they play the likes of Sam Darnold twice, who's looking to be a good quarterback, but he's still not great. Jameis Winston, they play twice. And they also play, who am I forgetting here?
Falcons, Atlanta.
Matt Ryan in Atlanta twice.
One more time. They played him last week. So
yeah. So I would pick up Tampa, and I would honestly hold them for the majority of the season.
The scary thing about Tampa this week, if you're just looking at week 3 in specific, if you're not looking season long, they are playing the Rams. The Rams have proven
Carolina is going up against Houston, and Baltimore is going up against another really easy threat in the Lions.
Here's what concerns me more about the Ravens going against the Lions is that the Lions can still put up points. They may make mistakes, but they put up a lot of points in week 1 against San Francisco. Whereas when you're going up against the Texans, I know they've shown that they can put up points too, but now Tyrod Taylor's hurt. You're going with rookie David Mills, most likely on a Thursday night. And we just saw Carolina just snub the team that made the Packers look like just a terrible football team in week 1.
For 1 week,
Carolina. Week 1.
Carolina is my week 3 pickup as well. Like Brandon said, the rookie quarterback, their defensive line is fast as all get out. that is a solid week 3 streamer defense to pick up.
And that's your deep dive by the butthole. James, thanks for the question.
Subscribe if you're still sticking around. We'd appreciate it.
Couple other guys.
Yes, tell your friends.
Running back by trade, but wide receiver by fantasy football app commission is going to be our guy.
You're the man.
CPAT, James. CPAT, what up? 84 flash. That dude had an excellent game. Technically still a wide receiver, but was used a ton in the ground.
ESPN, he's considered a running back.
Really?
I believe
running back slash wide receiver?
I'm looking up the stats right now, and Patterson was the number 3 RB on the week, according to ESPN. So he is a running back on theirs, but websites like MFL and NFL.com, he is still a wide receiver.
I think by the end of the season, he will either earn a running back designation or he will gain that slash. And having the slash is, it's excellent. You get to have the option of playing him not only as a running back, but a wide receiver. Even if he doesn't carry that designation, it looks like he's going to be used a lot in Atlanta.
Hey,
and
boys,
they like sticking with Mike Davis.
As I called my sleeper pick of the week, my stud of the game, Quintez Cephas already caught a touchdown on the first drive against Green Bay. Look for that to happen more often.
Let's go, kiddies, go.
All right. Let's get this butthole 5 rocked out so we can sign off and let you lovely listeners
enjoy
jump into the Monday Night Football game.
And root for them Lions.
Go Lions. One pride. Bite the kneecaps. I'm going to bite Gage's kneecaps off right here in the butthole 5.
Oh, you wish.
Uh-oh. It's getting feisty. Let's go.
It is now time to butthole 5.
You can post them in the comments.
Well, you heard that little squeal there. That was Gage's rage, and that means it's time to play the Butthole 5. Everyone knows the rules, but I'm going to explain them anyway. You have 30 seconds
35.
to name the top 5 in whatever category I give you. Since we are talking fantasy football, we're going to stay fantasy related. The timer will start after I read the first question. You'll get 1 point for each correct answer. Does not matter the order. If there happens to be a point tie after the first 5, we'll go into rounds 6 through 10. There happens to be a tiebreaker after that. They'll go back and forth. Clear as mud?
As much as I can.
Clear as mud.
All right. You will actually get 35 seconds because by the time I actually hit the sounder in the picture here, you're going to get your 35. So I want you guys to give me the top week 2 rushing quarterbacks. So the quarterbacks that got the most rushing yards on the ground in week 2. All right, and for those of you listening at home, make sure you check out Thrive Fantasy. It's your favorite DFS site. It's all prop bets, so you're going to be betting on things like, is Darren Waller going to get over 70.5 receiving yards this week? The under would have hit. You're going to be looking at things like James Conner, over 36.5 rushing yards. Other players, touchdown props, Justin Jefferson, over a half touchdown in week 1. Check them out. Use promo code BUD for an instant bonus deposit of $100 using promo code BUD. All right.
Oh, shit.
Now, 1 second here as I pull back up my stats here so I don't have to pull the answer up right away.
That posted as official butthole, but my list is in the comments. I just got it right in there.
His list is in the comments. Gage's Rage, it's on all 3 here. I can pull up any comment. Gage's Rage.
You dirty dog.
Danny Dimes, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson, and Dak Prescott. Scott, let's hear your top 5 rushing quarterbacks of week 2.
I had Lamar Jackson, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, Kirk Cousins, and Jalen Hurts.
Ooh. Here's the thing.
Scott gets the edge.
Here's the thing. We do have a winner by 1 point. It is Scott. It was Lamar Jackson with 107. Daniel Jones
wins.
95. Carson Wentz ended up with 37. Hurts with 82. Josh Allen and Kirk Cousins did tie. So I guess Scott got 4 with 35 rushing yards. If you wanted to see the 6 through 10, we're going to have to get this banner out of here. 1 second.
I got you.
Gage has got it. All right. To round it out, Kyler Murray and Justin Fields at 31. Tannehill at 27. And actually, 2 Bears quarterbacks made this list. Andy Dalton was at 25 rushing yards in week 1.
That's nuts.
As always, remember, Thrive Fantasy. If you sign up using promo code BUDHOLE,
No, Bud. B-U-D.
BUD, B-U-D, BUD.
B-U-D.
You get 100% instant deposit match on up to $100. That means if you deposit 100, they'll match you 100.
When?
Go sign up.
How
and
quickly
process
does
it
that
right
100
now?
end up in your account?
It
Yeah.
happens immediately.
Oh,
The second you put
shit.
100 in, you'll see 200 in your account.
It's not like those other.
That's all money.
Free money,
Twice
baby.
the amount of dollars to bet on tonight's game with some lines or just pick some. Basically, what Thrive does is elite. Go check it out. Use promo code BUD when you sign up. You're going to love Thrive Fantasy. And then also, this episode's sponsored by Glitch Energy. It's not a glitch, it's reality. If you sign up and use promo code BCMG, you'll get 10 to 20% off your energy powder or supplements using promo code BCMG. Thank you so much, Blue Collar Media Group.
Blue Collar Media
With
Group.
that being said, Gage's Rage, what did you say last week that we started telling everybody you like banging on yourself or something?
I have no idea
What was that sign up? And that wasn't.
It was that drywall dry balls. I like. Oh, fuck. What was it?
Wasn't pleasure yourself, was it?
No. Oh, fuck. It was
Go beat yourself.
Star, we
Go
need
beat
you.
yourself. It was go beat yourself. Go beat
Oh.
yourself, everybody.
Bye.
And go Lions.